one of the many theme songs of my youth. Daytona USA, released by Sega in 1994, is arguably one of the greatest arcade games of all time, featuring fast-paced, power-slide-heavy gameplay, mind-bending graphics, and one of the most banger-filled soundtracks ever committed to a recording device. Daytona USA was a showpiece for Sega and developer AM2 and took arcades, bowling alleys, and movie theaters by storm. But how did it happen? Today, let's take a look at the origin of Daytona USA. In 1992, GE Aerospace, a division of General Electric, got in contact with Sega and brainstormed a new arcade board to replace Sega's somewhat underwhelming Model 1 hardware. GE Aerospace engineer Bob Hitchborn straight up cold called Sega to propose a deal. Business was down at GE Aerospace in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was Hitchborn's job to try and find some kind of revenue stream. In an interview with car culture website Jalopnik, Hitchborn revealed that GE Aerospace's simulation and graphics technology was basically just sitting around as he tried to repurpose it by marketing it to companies outside of the military-industrial complex. I had total creative freedom to do anything I could dream of within the context of selling simulation products by day. But the fun really didn't start until after 5 p.m. when folks started heading to the doors to go home. In these after hours, I would take my team of interns and we would turn the various training systems into spaceships, race cars, raft rides down river rapids, or whatever we could dream up. During this time, Hitchborn was in contact with both Disney and Universal Studios in an attempt to market the technology, with Disney eventually using it in some of their attractions. However, the call to Sega would set the wheels in motion for GE Aerospace's CompuScene technology to cross over into video games. A group of Sega executives would visit Hitchborn at his office, which just so happened to be located right across from Daytona International Speedway in Daytona, Florida. One of the executives who made the trip was Yu Suzuki, one of Sega's most prolific game designers. Later that year, Hitchborn and his team would travel to Sega of Japan's office for another meeting to pitch the CompuScene software. At this meeting, Hitchborn and his team showed what their technology could do, with a demo of a race car speeding around a track. Sega was on the verge of shipping its new virtual racing game to arcades, but the technology that GE Aerospace was showing off would put the new title to shame from a visual standpoint. Sega was impressed and wanted that rendering power in their arcade machines. While GE Aerospace and Sega were working out a deal that would see the defense contractor support the video game developer, GE themselves were also working on a deal that would see GE Aerospace be sold to the Martin Marietta Corporation, another defense contractor which would later merge with Lockheed Corporation to form the modern military and aerospace giant, Lockheed Martin. With the deal made, it was time for Sega to use their new military-grade technology to develop an arcade board, which would result in the Sega Model 2 hardware. President of Sega Enterprises USA, Tom Pettit, suggested a racing game be used to debut the Model 2 board, specifically a game based off of NASCAR, which is experiencing a boom of popularity in the 90s. Sega Europe President Vic Leslie argued that they should make a game based on Formula 1 instead, as it was much more popular in Europe and the world abroad, but Sega went with a NASCAR-inspired pitch. Eventual Daytona USA director Toshihiro Nagoshi also heavily implied that the NASCAR idea was his, saying, "I was looking for some good themes for a new game and I just happened to see a NASCAR race while on a business trip. NASCAR was really simple and exciting, so I thought this might be a totally new direction for the market." NASCAR was exploding in the 1990s, seeing a massive surge in popularity. In the series' first 30 seasons, it was very much a regional sport, sticking to the southeastern United States where it had been founded in 1949 by a group of men led by Bill France Sr. However, the sport's viewership had been steadily rising since 1979, arguably the most important season in NASCAR history. One of the most popular drivers to ever compete in the sport, Dale Earnhardt, won the Rookie of the Year award, while another one of the sport's biggest heroes, Richard Petty, won his record-setting 7th Series championship. The 1979 Daytona 500 was broadcast live, flag to flag, for the first time on February 18th. A massive blizzard on the East Coast that had spread to parts of the Midwest had snowed in millions of people, who watched the race play out since they basically had nothing better to do. In the end, Richard Petty won his 6th Daytona 500, followed by what has simply come to be known as The Fight. On the final lap of the race, Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison made contact and crashed while fighting for the win. The two got into an actual fight afterwards, with an estimated 16 million people watching the CBS broadcast.
Two of the greatest fiddling here, fidgeting with first place. Passing some of the strikes in the last lap, trying to take it home. It's all come down to this. Out of turn 2, Donnie Allison in first. Where will Cale make his move? He comes to the inside. Donnie Allison throws the block. Cale hits him. He slides. Donnie Allison slides. They hit again. They drive into the turn. They're hitting the wall. They're head on the wall. They slide down to the inside. Let's watch those third place cars. They're out of it. Who is going to win it? Coming down, third place. They're coming around for the finish. Between A.J. Foyt and Richard Petty. Down the back straightaway come the leaders now. 2 cars are out. In the backstretch are the leaders. Watching for the leaders to, they're still up in turns 3 and 4. The leaders are up in turns 3 and 4. Coming down, Richard Petty is now pulling out in front. Darrell Waltrip is in second. A.J. Foyt is in third. Here they come. Waltrip trying to slingshot. Petty is out in front at the line. Waltrip to the inside. Petty wins it. Master has just recorded his 186th career, and there's a fight between Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison. The tempers overflowing. They're angry. They know they have lost. And what a bitter defeat.
In July of 1990, Paramount Pictures released Days of Thunder to theaters, starring one of Hollywood's most bankable stars in Tom Cruise, with the film depicting the early career of Cruise's character Cole Trickle in the NASCAR Cup Series. This association with Cruise further pushed NASCAR's popularity. The emergence of ESPN, whose first broadcast just so happened to be in 1979, would also help with NASCAR's growth, with the sport being primarily broadcast on the ESPN family of networks for almost 30 years. NASCAR itself started expanding outside of the Southeast, pushing into the Northeast and the West throughout the 90s, with new races at New Hampshire Motor Speedway, Texas Motor Speedway in the DFW area, and California Speedway, just 50 miles outside of Los Angeles. The United States economy was booming in the 1990s, allowing dozens of companies to spend part of their marketing budgets on NASCAR sponsorship, resulting in better funded teams. Consumer products made up the bulk of this sponsorship, allowing viewers to associate their favorite products with a car on the track. In the 1990s, if you had a favorite something, whether it be a soda, a beer, a cigarette, a detergent, motor oil, or food product, it was probably featured somewhere on a NASCAR stock car. In order to keep the cost of the new game down, Sega decided not to negotiate with NASCAR itself, but rather one of its racetracks, GE Aerospace's neighbor, the Daytona International Speedway, home of the Daytona 500. Opened in 1959, Daytona International Speedway is the brainchild of NASCAR founder Bill France Sr., who built the track to supplant the old Daytona Beach road course with a high-banked, high-speed purpose-built racetrack. NASCAR's most prestigious race, the Daytona 500, is held at the track every February to kick off the season, with the winner taking home the coveted Harley Earl Trophy. In the same year as the first 500, the track's infield road course was used for a 6-hour endurance race, and after a few more trials, the first ever 24 Hours of Daytona was contested in 1966. Known today as the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona, the twice-around-the-clock race is one of the most prestigious endurance races in the world, with the winners of each class earning the privilege to strap a Rolex Daytona chronograph to their wrist. Sega was able to secure the rights to the fabled circuit, so with the theme of the game in place, it was time to develop. However, Sega added a caveat of sorts. The game absolutely had to outshine Namco's Ridge Racer, which hit arcades in 1993. Ridge Racer had outshined virtual racing upon its debut, so Sega felt they had to answer back with Daytona. Legendary Sega development studio AM2, the same studio responsible for Hang On, Outrun, Virtual Racing, and Virtual Fighter, were given the task. Head of AM2, Yu Suzuki, would give the role of director to Toshihiro Nagoshi. At that time, Nagoshi had worked on 4 games for Sega, which included Virtual Racing as chief designer, but now he was being thrust into a director's role for the first time, along with co-producing the game with Suzuki. The development team threw themselves into research while starting development. Nagoshi researched NASCAR through books and videos, while game planner Makoto Osaki watched the film Days of Thunder supposedly more than 100 times during development. Other team members would travel to Daytona and photograph the racetrack for reference. Nagoshi himself would walk a lap of the 2.5-mile circuit to get a feel for its steep banking. However, most of this would be for naught, as the track actually isn't even in the game. Obviously, Daytona International was planned from the start, but after getting deeper into the design phase, Daytona was thrown out of the game, reason being that the track would come off as too repetitive for an arcade game once it was decided that the game would not be simulation based and would instead feature a drifting and power sliding mechanic. The team would instead design a wholly original track called 37 Speedway to be the game's sole oval track. The track is basically a much smaller version of the real-life Pocono Raceway located in Long Pond, Pennsylvania. Bristol Motor Speedway in Tennessee was also being considered for inclusion, but was also scrapped. With the hardware in place, the theme of the game set, and the developers getting to work, all that was left for the game was the audio. This is where arguably the most important person working on Daytona USA steps in. Takenobu Mitsuyoshi had been with Sega for a few years as a composer, having first worked on the 1990 arcade game G-Lock Air Battle, along with Nagoshi. Mitsuyoshi had just come off composing music for two other racing games, Virtual Racing and Outrunners, both released in 1992. In an interview with the YouTube channel Archipel, Mitsuyoshi said that he first got interested in video game music while he was in college. While in school, he was a member of a music club and also played keyboard in a band, and said, "One day I was in a car with a junior from the club. He put on some music. It was from Galaxy Force, a game made by Sega. He was playing the game's soundtrack. As I listened, it really felt like regular fusion music. I was surprised, thinking it was amazing. At the same time, I learned it wasn't made by musicians or composers, but from regular employees at Sega. I was surprised, discovering that there were musicians, but also regular employees making game music. It really attracted me." He would eventually end up at Sega, where he would contribute music and voice acting for over 3 decades, along with doing freelance work for other developers. When he was assigned to Daytona USA, Mitsuyoshi wanted to do a soundtrack with vocals, which to his knowledge had never been done before in a racing game. He would write the music and lyrics, and even sang the game's catchy tunes himself. Earlier I mentioned that it was Sega's top priority for Daytona to outshine Ridge Racer, and Mitsuyoshi confirmed this in the same interview, that this order was applied to all fronts of the game, sound included. Lyrics was how he figured Daytona could show up Ridge Racer. At the time Daytona USA was developed, Namco had released Ridge Racer. It was a game using polygons. It was one step ahead technology-wise. The graphics were beautiful. It was rare to see these textures too. I thought it was an amazing game. At the time, a statement came from Sega. It was an order saying that we should be ahead of Ridge Racer on all fronts, may it be graphics or in programming. We had to be above everything. Sound was obviously part of it. I thought that adding singing could help top Ridge Racer, so it was an early decision to add singing. This led to the game's iconic soundtrack, which I honestly believe is one of the things that makes the game the most memorable. Without that soundtrack, I think Daytona's legacy isn't nearly as celebrated as it is. With development complete, a prototype Daytona USA unit would make its debut at the 1993 Amusement Machine Show in Tokyo, along with location test units appearing in the city the same month. In March of 1994, the game would see its official release in both Japan and North America, with the first units being debuted at the American Coin Machine Exposition in Chicago, followed by a worldwide release the next month. Despite being one of the most expensive cabinets at the time, the game spread like wildfire. No arcade was complete without a Daytona USA 2-player cabinet, which is how I first experienced the game. I was obsessed with NASCAR as a kid. I watched the races on TV, collected the 1/64 scale diecast cars, and played NASCAR video games. One Friday night, probably around 1996 or so, I walked into the Skyline Lanes bowling alley in my hometown with my grandmother and saw that sit-down cabinet for the first time. That giant marquee on top of 2 monitors immediately caught my eyes, with the Daytona USA logo emblazoned across it. Then after seeing the seats, the steering wheel, the shifter, and the pedals, I knew I had to play it. When the game first starts, your senses are put on high alert by some of the most advanced graphics that the 90s had to offer, 60 frames per second animation, and Mitsuyoshi's killer soundtrack. The game's demo tells you everything you need to know. Drive fast and power slide any remotely sharp corner you come across. Once you insert your coins, in my experience the game was usually $1, you're greeted with the circuit select screen. The game has 3 circuits, with each representing a difficulty level. 37 Speedway is a 3-turn trioval with a sharp turn that has to be drifted to maintain speed, perfect for beginners to learn the game's mechanics. The advanced track is Dinosaur Canyon, featuring many left and right hand turns requiring hard power sliding to make. Seaside Street Galaxy is the expert course, taking the player on a tour of a small seaside town with some interesting set pieces outside the track. This is the ultimate test of your Daytona USA skills. After picking your track, you then have to select whether you want to use automatic or manual transmission. Automatic can get the job done, but manual is the way to go. The manual transmission car has a higher top speed, and being able to manually downshift greatly enhances your ability to power slide. After selecting the beginner course, you're greeted with a screen telling you to start your engine. The picture in the background appears to be a picture of a NASCAR Cup Series race, possibly at Daytona International. The number 4 Kodak car fielded by Morgan McClure Motorsports is clearly visible, along with the Petty Enterprises number 43 STP Pontiac. One thing I want to point out here is that the same screen for the Expert track features what is obviously a Roush Racing Ford Mustang that competed in the 24 Hours of Daytona and several other endurance races. This was definitely not something you'd see on a NASCAR circuit. After a rolling start, turn 1 approaches very quickly. The turn can be taken flat out, but cracking the throttle a little bit will help you if you start to push to the outside wall. Turn 2 comes up after a very short straightaway. This turn can also be taken flat out with the right approach. Taking the first 2 turns flat out is essential to laying down a fast lap. After turn 2, there's a long backstretch which leads you into turn 3, the tightest turn on the track. Just past the weird face sign, slam the brake and turn hard left while downshifting to first. Hit the gas and countershift to the right while going back up through the gears. Straighten out onto the start-finish line straight and you've completed a lap of 777 Speedway. The track is fun to drive, is forgiving to beginners, and is absolutely gorgeous if you ever take the time to soak in the visuals. I remember being in awe of the sweets above the grandstand in turn 1. Yes, this was a time when a window could impress you with its visual fidelity. Pine trees line both sides of the racing surface, and the gambling thing of the track is really cool. A giant roulette wheel sits outside turn 2, a slot machine is embedded into a mountain that the track goes under, and a spinning pair of dice grease the drivers at the start-finish line. Also, there's a giant carving of Sonic the Hedgehog in the mountain in turn 3. The scoreboard across the start-finish line also looks great and actually updates in real time. Daytona USA was built to show off the Model 2's power, and this first track is a supreme demonstration of what it was capable of. In the years after Daytona's release, Nagoshi would say the beginner track is his favorite, and credited it for the game's lasting legacy. My favorite course is the Oval Course. I believe it was the Oval Course that made Daytona USA so successful. I love this course because it took so much effort to complete. This corner of the bowling alley is where I first saw Daytona USA. Unfortunately, it looks like in more recent times Daytona is gone and has been replaced with Fast and the Furious. But this corner right here is where I first played it. And just over here is where I first played the team in T-Arcade game, Golden Axe, and Die Hard Arcade, known as Dynamite Cop in other parts of the world. Simpler times, man. Daytona USA came in several different cabinet configurations. The aforementioned 2-player cabinet is the one I believe most people are familiar with, as it was the most popular one. There was also the deluxe cabinet, which basically featured an entire cockpit of a car. An individual cabinet was also available, which was basically just half of the 2-player version. But the coolest feature of these cabinets was their ability to network with each other. Up to 8 Daytona USAs could be linked together to form the ultimate LAN party. There was even a special marquee and viewing screens available for anyone who had the space and money for it. I only saw one of these 8-player units with the full marquee once in my life, and it was at NASCAR Speed Park in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. The game would also later be released in a stand-up cabinet at a much cheaper price for smaller venues to have the game. All these different cabinet configurations meant that Daytona USA was everywhere. Arcade? Daytona USA. Bowling alley? Daytona USA. Movie theater? Daytona USA. Amusement park? 8-player Daytona USA. A bar? Stand-up version of Daytona USA. I feel like Daytona was almost as widespread as Street Fighter II. In the years since its release, Daytona USA has gone down as one of the most enduring arcade games to ever see the light of day. Exact numbers are hard to find, but according to print media sources such as Playmeter and Gamist, Daytona USA was the 9th highest grossing arcade game of 1994 in Japan, and the highest grossing cabinet of 1995 in its home territory. While in North America, it was the top dog of 1994 in terms of gross profits. In the years and decades since its release, Daytona has been featured on many best games of all time lists, ranging from Electronic Gaming Monthly, to Yahoo, to Empire Magazine. Director Toshihiro Nagoshi commented on the game's lasting legacy in 2012, saying, "I could see potential as I watched Daytona USA become popular in Sega arcade facilities in Japan, but I couldn't gauge how it was faring worldwide. After I saw Daytona USA in an airport in London 10 or 15 years after the launch, I realized then that Daytona USA had become this huge hit over the course of a decade. I am very thankful and proud to have been the originator of this game, which gives me so much confidence as a creator, even now." The Model 2 board that Daytona USA was designed to showcase would also end up powering Sega's Virtua Cop, Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally Championship, House of the Dead, and Top Skater games, some of Sega's most recognizable arcade titles. However, I feel that the original Daytona USA has stood the test of time as one of the most iconic arcade games ever made, and one of my personal favorites that I have fond memories of. If I could own one arcade cabinet, it would be that 2-player model of Daytona USA. Looking back, Daytona had to have one of the craziest development cycles ever. An aerospace defense contractor, one of Japan's top arcade developers, A legendary game designer, a rookie director, and a fresh-faced musician somehow all coalesced together to give us one of the greatest arcade games of all time. I'm Rick Combat 13, and I'll see you next time.
The fans really seem to enjoy that. You made it look easy.